Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by producer JL, John Luke Shapiro, and boy, do we have some stuff to talk about on the pod this week. Not a boring week in Rangerland. And, this is, I think, part of the reason that we do this is, when we actually have some drama and some intrigue. We want to get on here and vent it out and talk it through and kind of pick through what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And of course, put that in the context of the larger state of the greatest hockey team in the world that never wins the Stanley Cup, the New York Rangers. John Luke, how are you?
That's a good way to put that.
That's exactly who they are, right?
Yeah. I am doing well outside of the fact that 3 out of the 4 sports teams. Well, no, 2 out of the 4 sports teams I follow are not great right now. But yeah, I'm good. Rangers, not so much.
Yeah, and we'll see. I think Becky put it best. And I don't think she's going to join us tonight, although you never know. But when I put out the call for some questions on Blue Sky, she quoted my post and said, "The vibes are zero," which I think is absolutely correct. I can't think of a time. Actually, I can think of a time, and I referenced this a little bit earlier this week or over the weekend. The only time I can remember it feeling like this was 2015-16, and more so the aftermath of that season. I think when you're in it, you are hopeful, but that is the sort of ill-fated Eric Stahl trade season. That was, as I have called them before and will call them again, one of the worst, if not the worst, 100-point hockey teams of all time. They had like 100 or 101 points and got absolutely trashed by the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round. And that was, very much the end of that era of Rangers hockey. Of course, Vigneault stuck around another year, season and a half. Or I guess he lasted 2 full seasons, which is nuts. He should have been fired way before that. But that 15-16 season was a turning point, and the vibes all year were just off. You could tell. And I think unlike that team, this year's iteration is at least realizing that. Now, what they end up doing about it or what they can do about it from a player standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, and from a general management kind of roster building player acquisition standpoint, that all remains to be seen. But JL, can you remember a time, other than what I just referenced, 2015-16, when you felt kind of this down about the Rangers, especially in the face of them having a winning record?
Well, the season that I'm going to reference is the season that took place the year Vigneault got fired, which was, I think, the 2017-2018 season. So
that's when they did the letter. Yeah. So 16-17,
right.
they made the playoffs and lost in the second round to Ottawa,
To
series they should
yeah.
have won. So they actually won a round. They beat the Canadians right in the first round in 6 games. They lost to Ottawa in, I believe it was 6. And but like blue leads and Mark Stahl and Nick Holden, like that whole thing.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And a lot, Brady Shea was having kind of a breakout campaign. And like, that was when Alain Vigneault famously lost him on the bench, quote unquote. He like made these amazing plays and blocked a shot and scored a couple goals and then like didn't play for like, he
didn't
like
play him. Yeah.
Like from the third, and that was like a double overtime loss. That game, I think that all happened in the same game. Yeah, he went like 12 or 14 minutes without seeing the ice for no reason other than Vigneault apparently losing him on the bench. And then the next season was when they sent out the letter. But if you remember, they retained Vigneault. He did not get fired mid-season. They did not fire him until the end of the year. So he lasted, 4 full seasons. So yeah, but certainly that season, they have the Winter Classic win against Buffalo on January 1st or 2nd, whatever it was, 2018. And then they basically didn't win a big game after that until 4 years later, right? They were just basically playing out the string and lining up their trades to enter the rebuild. So yeah. Anyway, you were saying I cut you off there.
Yes. No, that's all right. And the thing about that is so at that time there was this sort of, how do you say, uneasiness in the air, kind of up in the ether, so to speak, because if you remember clearly, they went into that off season looking to try and do one of two things, or they were trying to do both things at once. They were trying to retool on the fly but also stay competitive, and at the time they didn't have a lot of the draft capital or prospects. This was, the end of when, the regime didn't really supplement the farm that much, so you didn't really have many reinforcements coming in terms of youth. So they signed David Desharnais in the offseason. They traded away Derek Stepan. They drafted Philip Hedel and Leah Sanderson, and both of them got rushed prematurely because honestly, they didn't have anyone to fill the third center role at that point. So and then they had the 10 home games in October, and they were really, it was kind of, everything was just up in the air, so to speak, because it was kind of like this mix of the team was getting younger, but you still had these vets and the message wasn't getting through. So everything was just kind of up in the air, but there was a bit more of this sort of negativity. And
Hmm.
explain the difference, because now, and this is just the way that I see it, maybe other people see it differently. Now it's different. The feeling is there. It sucks. The vibes are, like you said, are zero. It's not great at all. They're in a bit of a lull, but at the same time, um, this team is still incredibly talented. Like, we can't take that away from them. They're just lazy. The team in 2017, 2018, they just sucked. They were
Hmm.
off at aging contracts. Uh, you had, when Mika Zibanejad still had a pulse. He was probably the only one that was actually worth a damn at the time, not Zuccarello, and that's pretty much it. So, but now it's just
Yeah,
more.
they'd also brought in Kevin. Sorry, yeah, they'd also brought in Kevin
They got Kevin
Shattenkirk. That obviously
Shattenkirk.
did not work
That's
out.
right.
Yeah, that
Right.
that was, and to your point, that was kind of like we're going to do a rebuild on the fly, and it became very apparent that that wasn't going to work. I think you're absolutely right. The reason for, frankly, the anger from the fan base, which is growing, right? And we'll talk about Monday night's game in a second here. Um, is because they know that this team should be much better than this. And at this point, and this shows you how intelligent the fan base is, and frankly, how, how, and again, good on them, how tuned in the front office is. Like, people are seeing the record, which is 12-7-1 as we record this, and they're saying that is not, we are not a 12-7-1 hockey team right now. A lot of that has been covered up by our goaltending. And, if there's one silver lining to all this, it's that it does seem the Rangers are finally not content to just let their goalies carry them to wins and try to carry them all the way. I think they've finally realized, after years of doing this to Henrik Lundqvist, after quite a few years of Igor Shesterkin doing this, Jonathan Quick, you could throw him in the mix as well. He's been spectacular. They know this is not good enough. They know they need to be a better overall team, especially at 5-on-5. And this year, the issues are defensively, right? Now in previous seasons, it had actually been more about generating offense. They were okay 5-on-5 defensively, but they couldn't really generate offense. But everyone was like, well, okay, if you can be decent defensively and you have a great power play, that could make up the gap. And it kind of did. I mean, the Rangers are bona fide contenders, or have been in the last 3 seasons, and that formula has worked to a point. But like you said, the anger and the urgency now is born of the fact that everybody knows that there is way more potential in this team and way more energy and effort that should be given on a nightly basis. And, look, there is plenty of blame to go around, right? Jacob Trouba, easy to focus on, but Ryan Lindgren's game is a mess. Mika Zibanejad does not look interested, frankly, in being a part of this right now. He does not look like he can be part of the solution. And that is kind of the bigger elephant in the room than any of this, because his contract is truly unmovable. I think almost any other player on this team is movable. Um, I will give huge props to Artemi Panarin, who is playing his ass off and also had the had the balls to talk to the media in the wake of the 5-2 loss to the Blues. No other veteran player was made available, which to me is a pretty bad look when a team is struggling like this. And again, we'll get to all that. So let's recap the back half of the road trip and the Blues game real quick, and then we can kind of get back into the state of affairs here. So the Rangers actually came into that Calgary game. It was last Thursday. Um, in a good spot. They played two solid games. They shut out Seattle. They mostly controlled play against Vancouver. A couple of slippery moments here or there, but they won the game. Exciting game in Vancouver. And then they get absolutely stomped in the first period by Calgary. This is a Calgary team, by the way, that is not very good. And it was weird because, in my opinion, early in this game, it looked like the Rangers were not going to have much of an issue. They were winning puck battles. They were, having, kind of good extended zone time, through the first 7-8 minutes of the period. Dustin Wolf made a couple of decent saves. Lafreniere missed the net on a really good chance. And then Calgary gets a goal off the rush and it all falls apart. I mean, the Rangers basically stopped playing anything resembling coherent hockey for the next 25 minutes. They sort of showed a pulse in the second half of the second period and for most of the third, but they got outshot something like 21-6 or 21-5 in the first period of Calgary. And they have not recovered from that. So I don't know what it was specifically, but that game was a mess. And I don't know if you have any other thoughts or takeaways from that one, JL, before we move on to Edmonton.
The Calgary game, they just kind of got going too late. First period, like you said, was an absolute mess. And they did show some signs of life, but it just kind of seemed like it was too little too late. And, any professional National Hockey League team is going to take advantage of that, even if they're somewhat decent. Dustin Wolf, solid in net. A lot of people sleep on him. He's going to be a stud in Calgary. He currently is right now. Is the only reason why Calgary really has any of the wins that they have at this point. Again, lackluster effort from the players that you need to be superstars. Kreider, nowhere to be found. Zibanejad, nowhere to be found. He becomes more of a liability, and we'll get to more of that in a bit. But they just stopped after a bit. They stopped, tried to put the gas on, and then stopped again.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only maybe less than a handful of players in that game that actually stepped up and actually attempted to do something. But it was just too little too late that game. And it sucked because Calgary didn't really do much after that first flurry of goals in the beginning. But, it just, honestly, they just didn't show up.
Well, and I think again the big number here is 49 shots on goal for Calgary, right? So they were well on their way, and the Rangers did push a little bit. They also pulled the goalie obviously down a goal. They ended up losing 3-2, but Calgary was on their way to getting 50 plus shots on goal, and that's just unacceptable, especially when you look at the shots against totals for the last couple of weeks. I mean, other than that Kraken game, the Rangers are giving up, it's anywhere from 35 to 45, close to 50 shots a game. And again, it's just too easy for the other team to get through the neutral zone. The Rangers are kind of seeding the blue line way too easily. And then they can't get out of their zone. They spend so much time in their own end. And we're all getting these flashbacks to the Eastern Conference final last year where, Florida just pounded them for 6 straight games and just kept them pinned in their own zone for majority of that series. And that seems to be the book on them. For some reason, it's easy to do that. And yeah, they can't get out of their end efficiently. So that was the Calgary game. The Edmonton game was the other thing that the Rangers have been horrible at, for most of this core's era, right? So for most of the last 6 years, the Rangers have been statistically speaking, one of the worst teams against the rush. And that's what killed them against Edmonton, who's the best team on the rush in the NHL. No surprise with Connor McDavid leading the way. He scores, his annual highlight reel goal that will now live on all of the, in every NHL ad for the next couple of years until he scores another highlight reel goal against the Rangers. But they just way too easy for Calgary to enter their zone with speed and get quick chances off the rush. So they get 40 shots in that game. They put 6 past Jonathan Quick. And again, not much resistance from the Rangers. And this one was, I think, really where I think the Rangers could have lived with the Calgary game if they had a response at Edmonton. And one of the things that was a hallmark of last year's team under Peter Laviolette was how well they responded. They only had one extended losing streak all year. They had a 4-game losing streak. And that was in mid-January, and they never looked this bad, right? So not only did the Rangers not respond, they played a really, really poor game, and that is what obviously caused all of the alarm bells that kind of came to light on Monday morning. So same thing, JL. Back to you. Any thoughts on the Edmonton game?
Defensively suspect, lack of effort. Same old problems reared its ugly head, and again, the same culprits. Zibanejad, Kreider, Ryan Lindgren was especially awful that game. Jacob Trouba, not great. The defense just kind of gave up. The team just gave up. Any sort of resistance. Panarin was probably the only one that was actually halfway decent because he scored 2 goals that
Yeah,
night.
yeah.
But it just kind of seems like they put somewhat of an effort in and then they just stop playing. I don't know what it is. And the Edmonton game is the perfect example of that because it just kind of seems like they dump it in, get one shot, automatically back out. Dump it in, get one shot, automatically back out. There's no
Mhm.
second or third chances on net. And Stuart Skinner's going to have a good night. Any goalie's going to take that. And it's just there's just no urgency. How do you go from playing in Calgary to that sort of up and down game to the next where you just get boat raced out of the building? And then, it sucks for Jonathan Quick. I mean, he wasn't great by any means, but at the same time, when you're allowing all of these shots on goal, they're going to go in at some point, and you just can't leave Draisaitl and McDavid to their own devices because then they're going to do this and then other players score and it just ends up piling on. So
Yep.
it was just a continuation of just the lackluster effort, and it's frustrating.
Mika Zibanejad was a -4, and again, look, plus minus, you always take it with a grain of salt. It is a flawed stat that's been proved, but that's alarming, especially when you pair it with the fact that he was, I believe, a -3 against St. Louis. I'm going to check that right now. So the Rangers come back home. Now, look, this is one of those games that even if the Rangers were playing really, really well coming into it, I would have had major concerns because it's just a classic trap game scenario where you're coming off a long road trip. The first game home after a long road trip is just always like this. I don't know if it's jet lag. I don't know if it's just who knows what it is, but this is a time honored tradition across multiple sports. By the way, you see this in basketball too. Um, Maybe not so much in baseball just because of the rhythm of a baseball season, but especially in basketball, teams go on these long, 10-day, 2-week road trips. The first home game, they are always sluggish. It's a very difficult spot. Add to that the fact that St. Louis had just fired their coach and hired Jim Montgomery, so they get the new coach bounce right away. Montgomery is a good coach. Obviously it wasn't working in Boston, and um, but he's proven. He's won with multiple teams in this league, and the Blues came in and played a really simple game. And yeah, they beat the Rangers 5-2 again. Mika Zibanejad -3, Panarin -2, Lafreniere -3, Trocheck -2. So again, I don't mean to harp on this stat because it can be deceiving, but that's a -7 across 2 games for Mika Zibanejad. And when it jumps off the page, and that is, by the way, he was on the ice for a goal because he set up Will Cooley's the second goal of the game by Will Cooley. So he could have been he was on the ice for 4 goals against, which is, I think, the more alarming stat, right? So again, JL, you were in the building for this game. I watched most of it on TV. I didn't get the sense that the crowd was truly bloodthirsty, but I would love to hear from you what the vibe in the building was like at MSG on Monday night.
It was a decent crowd. Obviously there was a bit of tension in the building. But the people showed up. It was a good crowd, but the problem is that the team just didn't respond. So a lot of it became hostile. So what ended up happening was you kind of felt this tension around the seats. Like you mentioned it, Ranger fans are very attuned to this team. We're a very knowledgeable fan base, and I know patting ourselves on the back, fine, but I mean, the for a New York team, for a New York hockey team, Ranger fans seem to be pretty well versed, and people were legitimately pissed, because it always seemed because what it looked like, and I'll add my observation of the game while I add this. You looked at Cooley, Kako, Berard, Lafreniere, Panarin, and just a select few of guys who would come on the ice and are just absolute dogs. Cooley with the 2 goals, the second goal, which was him like leaning up on the goal post, on the goalie net. Brett Berard, just an absolute, the Energizer Bunny type player where he's just a motor. And then, Capo Caco almost converted a nice chance earlier in the game from, I think it was Berard, if I'm correct. So, and obviously also the crowd was feeding on the fact that Matt Rempe was back. And people were, the team somewhat fed off of that. But then you just see the malaise from Trocheck, from Zibanejad, even Panarin at times, Keandre Miller, Ryan Lindgren.
Mhm.
Ryan Lindgren and Jacob Trouba. I said this in the chat, and I posted this on both Blue Sky and on Twitter. Jacob Trouba with anybody else than Ryan Lindgren is fine. Ryan Lindgren with anybody is awful.
Mhm.
The two of them together is unacceptable. Every time, and mind you, this is a St. Louis team that I think, if I'm remembering the stat correctly, was one of the teams that shot the least in hockey. They put the least amount of shots per game. Obviously, this is before the firing of Drew Bannister. It's Drew Bannister. I forget his name. But it is Bannister, if I'm remembering it correctly. I might be wrong, but I apologize. It's been a long day. But
Yes, yeah, yeah.
before the
Baz
firing of their
Bannister.
coach,
Yeah, yeah.
so before the firing of their coach, they were one of the worst shooting teams in the league. And I look at the scoreboard, and I looked, it was 41 to 23 or 22 shots. And I'm saying, what is happening here?
Mhm.
They're just throwing it in again, no second chances. And the crowd felt it, and it became hostile because after the fourth goal, there, at least in my section, there were a lot of boos, a lot of yelling at Zibanejad, a lot of yelling at Lindgren, a lot of yelling at Trouba, because it just seemed like it didn't matter what they did. You would see Kako, Cooley, Berard, and you would think Zibanejad playing with Cooley and Berard would have been given a boost, but he's just, look, I'm not trying to dig on him too much, but he's just there. He's just skating. He's not hustling. He's not
Yeah.
engaged. Yeah, he had a couple of chances where he put on, the gas a little bit, but there was one example it sticks out to me now that I think about it. He received the pass right over the defensive blue line, and he skated through down near the wing, just the right little past the center ice position. He came down the right wing, and he was going in with speed, and he shot it. It deflected off of the skater, went into the corner, and he stopped. And he just kind of went the other way. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, go after that puck. Fight for it in the corner, push it down somewhere, chase it, you know? And then there was the malaise on the Braden Shen goal where Zibanejad takes it to the net. Everybody is just kind of standing around, and Braden Shen standing behind two
Yep.
defensemen after they didn't keep it in. Mika should have kept it in. Now, granted, it wasn't all his fault. Schneider and I think Fox kind of got caught looking, but at the same time, it's a 4-on-4. Go in, dig deep into the corners. The typical platitudes. Dig deep, pucks in deep. Go into the corner, fight and win the battle. Mika Zibanejad is 6'2", 240 pounds or whatever he is. He is not a small guy. Go in and do it. And that was the
Yeah.
frustrating thing. And the fans felt it. It was very tense. And by the time that the fifth goal went in, people obviously were leaving, but we booed him again. And I'm not one to boo. I'm a Mets fan. I don't even boo. And I've seen worse than this. And people were booing. It's just because most of the team looks disinterested. And it's become very frustrating because they can do more, and you see it. You can see the brushes of talent. Now, part of this could be that they're pressing to it. And I apologize because I'm ranting a little bit. They're overpassing. When they cycle the puck, they only get one chance on net and then don't fight for a second. And then primarily Trouba and Lindgren just kind of get hemmed in their own zone. Keandre Miller's also guilty of that too. Adam Fox, where the heck has he been? So it just kind of seems like there's something off, and they either are just very lazy or this team is a lot more flawed than we remember. It's incredibly frustrating, and the crowd felt it, and people were. It's getting to the point where things are getting restless, and they go back home on the 30th, which is this upcoming Saturday, and they're playing Montreal. Now, depending on what happens between Carolina and Philadelphia, which honestly they should win both of those games, realistically speaking. But if they somehow manage to, let's say they win against Carolina, and they let's somehow they win both those games, and then they lose against Montreal, things are going to get pretty. Even if they win, things are going to get pretty testy. Even if they win, if they lose any one of those games, like if they lose one to Carolina or Philly, and then they go home to Montreal. Now, if they lose all three, well, then I think at this point you really are going to have to consider pretty much trying to ship some people off. But
So, first of all, yeah, I mean, I agree with almost everything you said there. The play that is just indicative of where this team is at, and you called it, was the Braden Shen goal. So that's happens at a minute and 12 seconds into the third period. It's 4-on-4 because of the melee after the second period involving, Cooley, Rempe, Colton Pareko, I forget who else was involved from St. Louis, but
Jake Neighbors,
Jake Neighbors, right? Matching minors, right? Somehow, by the way, Pareko should have gotten a penalty because he really went after Cooley and started the
yeah,
whole thing. But whatever, they matching minors 4-on-4, and Mika Zibanejad does a thing that and I know none of my men's league teammates listen to this, but maybe I should tell them about it. Like I yell, and I'm like the yeller on the team. It's my role,
hmm
and I think the guys appreciate it. I hope they do. Um, I yell at my team about doing this type of thing all the time, where 4-on-4, especially, but even 5-on-5, where if you're coming down the wing and you are skating kind of towards the corner, unless you see a guy wide open in the slot, one of the worst plays you can make is to throw a blind, low percentage pass back into the high slot, because that is very easily picked up by any team in good defensive position and goes as a rush chance the other way. Because think about it, normally, if you're rushing down that side of the ice or whatever, down one of the wings, the defensemen are looking to join the play. Like, this is modern hockey. The defensemen are not hanging back at the blue line or in the neutral zone, playing a traditional defensive position. Like, every defenseman now, even the Ryan Lindgrens of the world, are taught to get into the high slot, become an available target, right? So if you throw a wayward pass into someone's skate in the slot and it bounces up, at, out towards your blue line, it's almost always going to be a 2-on-1, a 3-on-2, or a breakaway. Always. Mika Zibanejad should know better. That is a Bush League bullshit amateur hour play by him, by a world-class hockey player. And I can't explain it. He throws a blind pass into the slot. It becomes a breakaway for Braden Shen the other way, bing, bang, boom. And by the way, like you said, with the way their confidence is right now, um, along with, the fact that they are pressing, the second they went down 3-2 in the third period, you knew they were losing the game. You just knew there was not going to be a pushback. They
oh
just
yeah,
don't have it in them right now. And that is one of the things that they need to figure out, right? And to your point, is it going to be this malaise for the next 2 weeks, month, 2 months? And when do you pull the trigger on a trade to sort of, like, frankly, cut bait? Like, because look, any significant trade is necessarily the end of this era of the Rangers. Like, sure, look, they have a good core. Like, and when I say core, I don't just mean like the older guys that everyone is really kind of keying on in terms of, the reason for this, slump that they're in, or I don't know if we could call it a slump, because it doesn't look like they're going to come out of it, but they have a good foundation, right? With the kids, with the goaltender. This is not a team that needs to go into a 4-year rebuild again to get back to contention, but they need to change the mix. I've been saying this since the beginning of the season. I said it a couple of weeks ago. I didn't say it last week because I was cut short on my podcast appearance. But like, Mika Zibanejad doing that it's just so disappointing. It's so not him. Like, what you should do in that scenario, just to finish the thought, is take it around the net, especially 4-on-4. You have open ice, you maintain possession, you get set up in the offensive zone. And the worst thing that can happen is you get a shot on goal and then you reset and you're in good position defensively. He put everybody else on the ice in a horrible spot and he cost his team a goal. And that's why he was a -3, should have been a -4, could have been a -4 if he didn't happen to be on for the Will Cooley slam dunk. So, that was to me the moment of the game that sort of encapsulates this entire Ranger team to this point in the season. Again, they had a good start. I know they were 5-0-1. They looked good in most of those games, but they're 7-7 since, right? It's okay, you're like 500, but in most of those 14 games, right, they have played poorly. They've even in I would say 5 of those 7 wins were goaltender driven, were Jonathan Quick standing on his head, Igor Shesterkin making 45 saves, et cetera, right? So they really have not played a good representative hockey game, or a good streak of representative hockey in, since early October, since the first week and a half of the season. So, with all that, and it happened before the game, but it obviously makes sense to dive into it now. Chris Drury, not so subtly, put it out to the world, the entire hockey world, not just the other GMs, because he knew this was going to get out, that the Rangers are open for business. He named names. He said Trouba and Kreider are certainly available, sort of top of the list, essentially, of guys that we would be willing to move on from. And this was, you know, certainly shocking when it first happened, but I think it was only shocking in the sense that it did happen. When you think about it, it actually makes perfect sense, right? The Rangers need a shakeup. I think the fans feel it. I think management knows it. I think the players probably deep down know it. And this is what Drury decided to do as a step one towards waking his team up. So, JL, what was your initial reaction to that news when we got it?
When it came out, I said good because
Me too.
they're too content, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm no professional player by any means, having played sports at a very amateur level, but you're getting paid millions of dollars to play at the highest level in the world. And you should not be that careless. I think it was good what Drury did. I was surprised that it came out directly from them. I would have thought, like you said, it's shocking that he did it. I was kind of thinking that maybe it would have gotten leaked by a reporter, quote unquote leaked, which means the Rangers did it. But he just came out and straight up said it. And that's the one thing that I've kind of liked about Chris Drury. Look, he's not perfect. Okay. He's not perfect by any means whatsoever. Everyone's going to point to the Booch and the Booch trade and the Goodrow signing, but he's done a lot of good for this organization. I'm not trying to piggyback or ride on Drury, but the thing that I like about Drury and this crop of management and even the coaches is that they know it's a problem. Like you said, they know that this has become an issue. Now, the last time we had something similar to this was 2 years ago when uh funny enough, it was right before the game against St. Louis, where it turned out Gerard Gallant was on the hot seat, and if they had
Mm-hmm.
lost that game against the St. Louis Blues, he was going to get fired. That was all pretty much confirmed, and that Drury wanted to bring in Barry Trotz. But they put Zibanejad with Kako and Lafreniere. Kreider played on another line. It was probably with Trocheck somewhere, and they ended up winning. And that momentum carried them basically all the way through the rest of the season, allowed them to make the playoffs that year. So you're kind of hoping that Drury doing this now can maybe do that, because it's pretty much almost the same crop of players, at least more of the core more than anything.
Oh,
And I was
100% it is. Yeah.
I was happy because look, think about it from a fan's like our point of view as fans. Okay. So we obviously love the Rangers. We're never going to give up on them. We're diehard fans. But you also have to think of it this way. And this is how I'm proud. Now I'm a natural optimist, so to speak. Everyone knows that. So I'm always looking at the silver linings of things. This team is not as bad as they are, but they're not as good as they were, as I tend to say. Dave likes to use the similar arguments as well. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
bad team. They're just lazy. So as a fan, especially as a season ticket member, you pay money to go see them, right? The organization knows that people put money. Ticket sales are one of the big things for teams,
Mm-hmm.
organization wise. Is ticket sales are always the key. Now they're never going to run out of money because it's MSG, but at the same time, you know a winning team brings you more money than a losing team. So if I'm, let's say in my instance, I like to drive to Secaucus Junction because I live in New Jersey, and then from there I hop on the train and go into Madison Square Garden. So you're talking about tolls, parking, and then concessions. Okay, so and why do I bring up all that? Because if you're a fan of a team, and I like to do this with the Mets too. If you're a fan, you want to pay. You're paying for an experience to see a team win. This is, you're watching $1 million players go on the ice and, like I said, play the sport at the highest level. I'm giving you money to win. Okay, pretty much is what it is, because all that money gets funneled in somehow, whatever. So when you pay money, especially if there are people who can't afford to go more than twice or once, you go and you put all this money into watching a team that's kind of on a malaise. That sucks. And so when management says, "Hey, it's open for business. You got to step it up." I'm happy not only as a fan but also as a consumer, because now it's telling me that at least there is somebody somewhere within the organization, whether it's the coaches or general manager, that says, "Hey, listen, whether it's because they spend all this money or it's the fact that you're not doing what we're asking you to do, there's somebody's getting put on notice." And it's good. I think Drury, I think, is very good at that, where if he knows, excuse me, if he needs to cut bait, he cuts bait. Look at what happened with Goodrow. He overplayed his
Mhm.
hand with the Trouba thing, but he knows when to cut bait. And I know if he had the opportunity to shed these guys already, he would have done it. So that's why I'm hoping that Dolan kind of maybe gives him a little bit more of a leash, because I want to see what he can do when he's actually able to get rid of what he can get rid of.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, what I'll agree with you in the sense that look, as much as and I'm a season ticket holder as well. I definitely want to see. I don't expect them to win every game. I don't expect them to win every year. And I'm a Yankee fan too, so people might be surprised to hear me say that. I'm not one of those unreasonable Yankee fans, by the way. But point is, like, I think the thing about all most sports fans, specifically New York fans, who are not accustomed to a lot of championships, like, just give us a good effort, right? Like, make sure the fans know that the players are busting their ass, that the team is together, that there's a culture and an identity, right? Like all those things. And the Rangers had that, and they have had that for most of the last few years, and look, it wasn't perfect, but they, and there was a little bit of like hey, look, we got a great goalie. We're very talented at the top of our roster, but we're also, scrappy enough to make the conference final 2 out of 3 years. And we should be good enough to like maybe pull this off. And I think like the disappointment of realizing that this core probably isn't good enough to pull that off is what everybody's dealing with right now. And this was the first step, to your point, JL, of like putting the team on notice and basically saying, look, like, we've done our evaluations, right? Like, we know what your ceiling is. And like, this is not about like, it's a high ceiling, man. Like and I know people don't want to hear it, but like making the final four most years, or, 2 out of 3 years, and 5 times in however many years they've done it now, 12 or 14 years, going back to 2012, like, that's a pretty high ceiling. That is not an easy thing to do. Like, ask, fans of the Montreal Canadiens, who I know they made the final in 2020, but no one really counts that, right? Like, ask fans of the, whoever, the San Jose Sharks, ask fans of the New York Islanders, like, you know, uh, even the Devils, right? The Hurricanes have not made the conference final. They made one conference final, and out of all the regular season success they've had over the last 7 or 8 seasons. What the Rangers have been able to accomplish is, it's a pretty high ceiling, but we've done our evaluations. We know this is probably not going to work unless this core has another gear, right? And so we're 20 games in, we're a quarter of the way into an 82 game season, and this team has shown that they are more of the team that they were in year 2 of Gallant than they were a team that they were last year, that could maybe find another gear, as competition ramped up. Because the other troubling reality with this year's Ranger team is they are very bad against teams with winning records. Normally, I don't really put too much stock into that, because there could be a variety of reasons for, the randomness and kind of those results. And, you know, they could play very good games against teams with good records and lose, right, because of goaltending or whatever it may be. And they might it's there's a lot of seasons where it's the opposite, right, where you happen to like really do great against teams with winning records, or you do awesome on the road but terrible at home. Like there's so much randomness in those stats. But I do think with this team, it is telling that as soon as the level of competition is raised, as soon as like another gear of intensity is demanded of them, they just don't seem to have it. And look, it does come back, I think, ultimately to Trouba. I think the Kreider thing, and I'll also say this again, this is very, irresponsible, but I'm just a fan talking on a podcast. Like, I don't really think Chris Kreider's hurt. I think that was a polite benching and kind of sparing him the embarrassment of being scratched. He is going to travel with the team to Raleigh. We'll see if he's in the lineup on Wednesday against Carolina. But this comes back to Jacob Trouba and the fact that they couldn't move on from him in the summer. And I do think that the locker room is not handling this scenario well. So what I will say, and then we'll get to the one question we have and wrap it up here. Drury probably has to do something. He has to pull the ripcord at some point, because there's been enough messages sent to this locker room that like, hey, changes are coming. This is probably the end of the line for this group of players as it is currently constituted. There has not been a good response from within the room, but you cannot let this linger now. This cannot be hanging over the heads of the players until March. You can't do what you did 2 years ago with like Patrick Kane and Vladimir Tarasenko and try to paper over it with a little bit more star power. Even like the Brad Marchand thing I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that doesn't really hold any water. It doesn't make any sense given where the Rangers are right now. But let's talk about that quickly. Who could the Rangers target? That was the one question we got from, very ironically, his name on Blue Sky is Gerard Gallant slander account. He goes by Alan T. Anderson on
I
Blue
love
Sky. Who are some realistic trade target teams for Kreider and Trouba, and what would the return look like? I'll spitball this quickly, and I'm not, super good at this. This is where we miss Dave on this podcast. I'll give a quick response, and I'll go to you, JL. With Trouba, like anyone on the list that will do a trade, I don't really care, and I don't expect to get much for him. I would say, you take a 5th or a 6th round pick and you run. When it comes to Kreider, that's where it gets interesting. I think Kreider becomes one of 2 key players in like a big, sort of blockbuster level trade. That's the only way he gets traded to me, is if it's like him and Keandre Miller as a package to, let's say, Minnesota or Nashville, or, a team like that is kind of like considers themselves also supposed to be in contention, but like needs another, needs to add some, what Kreider brings, and wants some more youth and flexibility on their back end. So I can't speak to like specifics on this right now, but like Kreider's to me is like one component of a massive deal. And that's why I don't think it's going to happen, is because those types of trades just don't happen, especially in season in the NHL. So that's my quick and dirty thoughts on that. What about you, JL?
So Trouba to Detroit was actually a really good fit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think he could potentially go to Ottawa, possibly, maybe Anaheim, because I feel like you look at teams who are looking to try and bolster their rosters with some veteran presences, maybe even San Jose, you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
even though that's where they essentially dumped Barclay Goodrow, because
Well,
there's
Drury's
plenty of
he's done a lot of deals with Mike Greer. He and Mike Greer are
my
close too. So
career,
that makes
right.
sense. Yeah.
So, and they could take the cap hit. You could even say the same thing for Mika Zibanejad. Send him off to a team that needs like a veteran presence and just kind of go and do that. Chris Kreider, I do agree with what you're saying. I don't think he's going to get traded. It's just a kind of like, I guess they just put that out there. But I think Minnesota would be an ideal location for him. Boston wouldn't be a bad location for him, because you have to look at
Mm-hmm.
teams that could probably try to look, maybe St. Louis too. Teams that are looking to maybe try and flip the script in terms of picking up a player like a Keandre Miller, who is still young but has some experience, and then maybe you could put him with like a real shutdown defenseman. Also, I have one for Ryan Lindgren. I have this weird inkling to me that Ryan Lindgren goes to Anaheim. And that might actually be part of the package deal, or a package deal, because something tells me that while they want to change the room and probably change some of the faces around, um, I feel, and this is just my opinion, and I'll leave it at this, that they orchestrate a big trade with Anaheim that maybe involves Kreider, maybe not, but it involves Keandre Miller or Lindgren or another forward, and I think Trevor Zegras comes back the other way. I feel like that name has, it's been mentioned a lot with the Rangers, and
Mm-hmm.
they kind of want a change of scenery, and
Mm-hmm.
Miller and Ziegers should do that. And then one more too, because now it just popped into my head. Another name that's been linked to the Rangers, at least has been just been brought up casually. I don't think there's really much credence to this, but I feel like it would make a good fit. The Buffalo Sabres. You're looking at a team with a head coach like Lindy Ruff who demands a lot from his team. They're a very young roster. And if, the Rangers are looking for another skill guy that could potentially complement, whether it's Artemi Panarin or Alexis Lafreniere. And so then maybe you use Buffalo as a trade partner as both teams look to try and shape up or shake up things. Buffalo's very young, looking for some leadership. Maybe a Kreider or maybe even a Miller, a Lindgren, or anyone on this team could be a veteran presence for that organization. And I feel like that could be something. So that's, again, just me spitballing. I'm not great at it either, but just kind of what I've just seen from just checking out the National Hockey League so far.
I mean, so Buffalo's in a wild card spot. You got to think they're desperate to make the playoffs. They look like they're in decent shape, but they're going to be contending with the Bruins, the Islanders, probably the Rangers, for a wild card spot. I mean, that does make this tricky too. About, do you want to send these players in conference? Um, I'm a fan of making the best deal available, and I think you can't worry about where these guys go and how they're going to play, right? Especially if you're looking to help your team. But this is hard. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this is truly like threading a needle, right? Trying to find a player that's the right age, the right cap hit. Even though the cap's going up next season, you got to fit him here this year. Um, I mean, certainly Trevor Zegras jumps off the page just because of his potential. And I do agree that, he might be personality wise, somebody who kind of breaks up a little bit of the kind of mopey vibe in the room. But I also do think that like the Rangers just, and again, I don't take this, the literal way, but like there is a little bit of a lack of toughness with this team, right? And I don't mean it from a Rempe perspective or that it's not that they don't punch and hit and fight enough at all. It's a mental fortitude thing. Like they are, at any sign of adversity, they really have shown a tendency to crumble. And they do come across as just a little bit too like deferential and gentlemanly, and that to me is just, there's just not a lot, like there's just not enough like killers on this team. And I'm thinking of like Mika Zibanejad has had two awful games. He doesn't address the media. He didn't participate in the optional practice. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? Like, does he want to actually be here? What is his care level right now about the Rangers and about his hockey career? Like, I think it's an honest question. Like, he does not come across as just, he just doesn't seem like he's putting as much into it as he can give. And, you think about, what the truly elite players in any sport do when they face adversity. Like, even I'm thinking of an example, right, with the Knicks, where they missed a bunch of free throws in an early season loss. And like Karl Anthony Towns, right, who big star player that they acquired in the offseason, not known, by the way, for his toughness, questions about his work ethic. Would he fit in on like a tough Knicks team under Tom Thibodeau? He was on the court like 10 minutes after the game ended working on free throws because he had missed a couple of free throws. Like, there's all these stories of Kobe Bryant going to gyms at 2 a.m. because he wasn't happy with his game that night. Like, is Mika Zibanejad doing that? Like, I honestly don't think so. And I just think that there's a mentality that not just him, but Trouba lacks, that I think Vincent Trocheck seems to be lacking, even though he was quite the opposite seemingly last year. Um, and again, this may be unfair. You don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but like we can only infer as much as fans, and like what we're seeing from this team is just not good enough, and it's causing us to have these types of conversations. So, one thing I we'll wrap with this, JL. Um, it was reported today by Arthur Staple that Chris Drury had addressed the veterans, that he had a productive, honest conversation with the veteran core, right? And take that to mean what you will. Probably Trouba, Zibanejad, Kreider, probably Lindgren in that group, Trocheck in that group, Panarin in that group. So that's probably Drury saying like, hey, you guys know why I did this, right? Like, and I'm going to play it straight with you. Show me something. Show me something in the next couple of weeks. These are not easy games. The one thing you said before, JL, that I'll disagree with, that they should beat Carolina. I don't think they should beat Carolina at all. Carolina is a they're gonna get 50 shots on goal on the Rangers. They're 8-1 at home. They're 15-5-1 on the season. And I know the Rangers have good history against them, but certainly going into this game, just based on recent form of the teams, like I would, I would expect Carolina to win the game. But this is hockey. It's a weird game. Rangers get going on the power play. Maybe they do finally the wake up call hits and they play a good game. But certainly Philadelphia, a pretty weak opponent. Montreal, a very weak opponent. Those are winnable games. But I think Drury probably said to those guys, like, hey, show me something. Force me not to make a trade because I will do it. Any final thoughts before we wrap?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. They just need to show up. This is a very lazy group of people. And I say lazy, not that they don't show up and want to play. It's just they're very selective with it. This team has a ton of talent, and there is still time for them to save this season. It's a long, 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 long hockey season. Maybe this
62
is
games
their
left.
62 games left. One good streak gets you back into the graces, and you don't need to win a division. You don't need to win the President's Trophy.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to make it, and that is it. It
Yep.
doesn't matter where you finish, just as long as you finish in where you need to finish. And I think that they have enough to do it. But if it has to get to the point where they need to make a trade now, I'm all for it. I'm not hitching my wagon on anybody because as much as I love Chris Kreider, like you said, best deal available, got to do it. Mikey Zibanejad, best deal available, got to do it. It's the betterment for the team, not for the player. If they don't work, adios.
Yeah, listen, it's definitely been an interesting couple of weeks here for the Rangers, and now they're hitting kind of a fast and furious stretch of games. So this is a challenge for them. They've been on the road a lot, and we'll see how they respond. It'll be very intriguing. We'll be here every week to track it on Live from the Blue Seats. JL, want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. Want to wish all of our listeners a happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Yeah, it's as we enter the holiday season here, this is always my this is always really it's one of my favorite parts of the hockey season when you kind of hit the holidays. MSG does a great job with like the Christmas kind of programming in game, and always fun to be in the city at night when it's all lit up and it's a little bit cold.
Yeah,
It's
they put up the menorah and the Christmas ornaments up in the lobby at MSG on
yeah, I
Monday
love it.
before that. So it was
I
pretty
love
nice.
it. Yeah, no, it's really cool. And you know what, the crowds do tend to get a little more excited this time of the year. This is kind of when especially with New York, the football season's really died off anyway.
Jeez.
Baseball's in the rearview mirror, and people really start focusing on the Garden teams. And look, hopefully they turn it around. Look, the Rangers deserve all the criticism they're getting. I don't think the players would disagree. And we want to see them do well. We don't want to come on this podcast every week and trash Mika Zibanejad and trash Jacob Trouba. Like, there are solutions here. And whether those are trades, whether those are adjustments, we'll see how the Rangers go. But again, want to thank everyone for listening. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you next week.